Welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about my radio restoration, repair, and modification business. This is a small, very small business that I started out of thin air, accidentally. Never intended to start a business, but here we are. I only anticipated repairing one or two radios, including my own, and so far I've done about, well over a dozen, and wasn't expecting that. So I thought I would talk a little bit more about what I do, how this started, and where I hope it ends up. And that's what the purpose of this video is for. So to start off, I fell into this business entirely accidentally and out of necessity. All both the same, very true statements. I bought a '94 Miata. It's a red with tan interior, package C. And mine was fitted with the optional Panasonic stereo, which is made by Pioneer. And one of the things that always bothered me about this car is I wanted the factory stereo. I'll talk a little bit about why in a minute. But what bothered me the most about this car, or the stereo in particular, is that the faceplate was in pretty rough condition. I'll show you an example of one that I pulled originally from this guy here. And if you look up close, you can see that these overlays here are yellowing and delaminating. And this is a polycarbonate overlay that allows light to pass through, and I'll show you what I mean. So it's backlit. Okay. And you can see there's a crack in the one of the layers there as well. So what happens to these stereos is, over time, UV degradation starts to set into the painted surface, and the paint begins to chip. It actually, if you look at this, it's actually corroding underneath the paint, and it's causing these kind of look like ant track patterns in the finish. This is a more severely degraded example. Got a couple here. This one, the clear coat has completely failed, and you can see it if I shine the light on it. See that? Now, when that is front and center on your dashboard, and it's the focal point of the dashboard, really, because it's painted to be so. They didn't paint this silver so that it blends in with the dash. They wanted it to stand out. It just screams, "Steal me." But when it looks like this, it's kind of a built-in anti-theft device, if you ask me. But anyway, because of the degraded finish, the radio didn't really add anything of value to the car's appearance, even though the rest of the car is almost showroom clean. Not only that, it's built with one of the world's worst CD players. Even when these were brand new, they skipped like crazy when you went over bumps. And the reason for that is there is no anti-skip memory of any kind. There's no error correction. This is basically your first generation Sony Discman in car stereo form. Thirdly, the cassette deck. Even though it worked, it would often stop automatically and reverse prematurely. Sometimes you put a tape in and it would immediately eject the tape. Sometimes, in most of the radios that come into my shop, they don't even accept tapes at all. So one of the reasons I wanted the factory stereo in the first place is because being a 90s car in that condition, I wanted it to be as original as humanly possible, with some exceptions. I did install an IL Motorsports modified center console, but that was for practical reasons. But for appearance, I wanted the factory stereo not only to be present, but I wanted it to be fully functional, cassette deck, CD player, and all. Now the other thing I wanted was to be able to connect my phone so that I could listen to music through the Bluetooth connection on my phone. But in 1994, they didn't have Bluetooth, obviously. So I did what everybody else does. I took the radio out, I set it aside in the garage, and I put in this guy right here. I bought this from Crutchfield. This is a modern-day Bluetooth-equipped CD stereo by Kenwood. This is not a bad radio. This is actually a fairly decent one. I bought the Metra dash mount and everything. And, of course, the harnesses, so I didn't cut any connectors off my harness. But this radio got me going for the first year I drove that car. Meanwhile, I had this one set aside in the garage for a rainy day. Well, last January, that rainy day came, and I started working on it. So, a couple of issues that I had to address with this radio. Number one, I had to replace all the belts and lubricate and clean the cassette deck to solve the various issues related to that. The appearance of the stereo was the second biggest issue I had, and that was a little more involved. As a matter of fact, that is why I started this business. So it's not enough to just repaint a faceplate. You also have to consider the other elements as well. So on that faceplate, you have silkscreen graphics. You've got the Pioneer logo. You've got the model number. You've got the legend for the switches. And you've also got this right here. This is a printed polycarbonate overlay. There's one here, and there's one down on the Bodysonic amplifier. So I figured, well, I can repaint these. You know, it won't be the same shade of silver, but I can get it close, or fairly close. But I can't make these. I could make stickers. I could go, you know, print out on self-adhesive sticker paper, and, you know, bada boom, bada bing, right? Well, not quite, because these are exposed to UV rays whenever that top is down and the sun's up. So anything that I print off a laser or an inkjet printer is going to fade, it's going to crack, it will shrink, and it just won't be a very, anywhere near what it would look like from the factory. Nor would it have the longevity that a factory made part would offer. So I started to reach out to industrial printing companies, and I found one that was willing to work with me. They were fairly local, and I talked to what turned out to be the owner of the company, and I explained my situation, and he said, well, we manufacture these types of overlays for the aerospace industry, for appliance manufacturers, for, you know, and he just rattled off the types of customers that they have. So they were fairly legit, or they are legitimate, and they have I think they were in business over 30 years, so they know what they're doing. So he said, just send me your faceplate, send me what you have, and we will have our graphic artist recreate what you've got. And I said, sure thing. So I sent him a set of these faceplates, and he sent me a bill. I ordered initially, I think I ordered 30 of them. And the reason I ordered so many, I only wanted one set, because I have one radio in my car. But because of the setup costs, it cost me about $500 to reproduce one of these. That's how much it would have cost me to do one set. So I said, well, why don't we do this? I will order, I said, give me 30 of them. And because once you pay the setup fees, each set thereafter is only a few bucks. So he sent me a pack of these. And at that point, I'm now $500+ in one stereo. And I have a problem. I have these that I need to now sell so I can get some of my money back. So I started reaching out to owners of the 1993 limited edition Miata, of which this stereo is a factory. These stereos were included in the 93 Miata, the 93 limited edition. That's the black over red interior model. These were standard equipment on those, along with a teardrop-shaped door speaker cover and tweeters mounted in the armrest pads on the doors. So I figured I need to find an audience, people who have these radios who want to save them. So that's where I shot my sights. So I reached out and I said, I had these reproduced. If you want to restore your radio yourself, I was selling these decal sets. Very quickly, I sold out of them. I think I sold all 30 sets at this point, and it took me about 2 weeks. I sold some overseas. I sold them to Canadian customers. I mean, they went all over the place, all over the United States. And I sold them as a kit because there's one other element that you have to consider, and that is the silkscreen graphics. So I sold them as a kit. Hold on. Oops, screwed that up. I sold them as a kit with a set of water slide decals. I can't reproduce the silkscreen graphics, but what I could do is I could print on a color laser printer. I printed my own recreation of these graphics in print in what they call a water slide decal. Well, that created a new problem. You can put water slide decals on anything, but they won't last. They're not designed to be exposed to the elements. They're not designed to be washed or cleaned periodically. They have to be top coated. That is mandatory. So what I did was I did my set of faceplates. Once I had the decals applied, I had the paint applied. And I didn't even mention the paint. So the paint that I used is a Rust-Oleum product. This is titanium silver, and it has a slightly metallic sheen to it. It doesn't look good on camera, but in person it looks great. But it has a slight metallic sheen, whereas the original was just a matte silver. And so I had to kind of balance my paint with my clear coat to give it a matte finish. So I can't just use any clear coat over the water slide decals and the paint, because the clear coats that you find over the counter at AutoZone or any hardware store, they're not the most durable product on planet Earth. They're actually quite fragile. They scratch easy. They're not chemical resistant, and they oxidize pretty quickly. So I couldn't just use any clear coat. I had to search out for another product. So I found a product called Spray Max Matte Clear. And the Matte Clear product from Spray Max, it has a built-in chemical activator. So the difference between the paint that you buy off the shelf at the store and this product is that the off-the-shelf clear coat is, I believe it's oxygen catalyzed. So when it's exposed to oxygen, it cures and it hardens, and it takes a great length of time for it to fully reach its maximum hardness. The SprayMax product, on the other hand, is chemically activated, so you have to activate it at the time of use. You press a plunger in the back, it breaks a little capsule inside the can, and it activates the paint. You have 48 hours to use it, or it turns into a pumpkin. So I'm thinking economic-wise, if I'm going to make any money doing this, because I now need to recover my money on these, and I have to recover the $30-odd that each can of paint costs me. So I have to somehow aggregate that over a set of several radios. So I started a service where people can send me their radios for restoration. I can line up all the faceplates and spray them with one can of paint and get it done all in one shot. So long story short, this is the end result, and these look great. I even do the knobs at the same time using the same process. And so far, again, we're over a dozen of these done so far, and customers seem to be very happy. I've got one in my car. It's been in the car all summer long, and I drove the car quite a bit, so it got some use, some exposure to the sun, and so far everything's going pretty well. Now that addresses the cosmetics. So we have these custom made overlays. Now, before I continue, I no longer sell these. These are no longer available for sale. I'm saving the ones I have for the restorations that come my way. And I have enough to do, quite a few restorations. And I hope to do more. But I'm no longer selling these overlays. If you bought a set for me, great. Enjoy them. But I can no longer sell them because they cost so much money. To have another run of these produced, I'd have to outlay another $500, which unfortunately would keep me in the business longer than I ever anticipated. So my goal is, once these are gone, I'm done. I'm retiring. I want my free time back. Let's address another issue. So the CD player cannot be improved. It is what it is. It was made with the technology and a price point that made sense to the executives at Mazda in 1994. So unless you live in an area with flat roads, the CD player, I'm going to say it's functionally obsolete. I will fix them. So every radio that comes to my shop, the CD player gets adjusted and I can get them working again. I found that one of the biggest issues with these is you have to compensate for the aging laser, and the driver electronics for that laser, and you can compensate by just nudging the laser power potentiometer just a hair, and that will wake it up and it will work again. It will skip when you hit a bump because that's the way it was made. There is no fix for that. As a matter of fact, it was such a problem when these cars were still under warranty. And a lot of the radios that come my way actually have this fix applied. They install a little foam pad. This one doesn't have it, but most of them do have it. It's a little foam pad that goes underneath the body sonic amplifier to cushion it against, I think, one of the mounting surfaces. It doesn't help, but it was something. They did something, of course, but it doesn't really help. They still skip like crazy. The Miata has tight suspension, even in stock form. God help you if you have custom suspension in your car. But anyway. So the other issue that we have is lighting. So what I've done is I've identified which types of lamps were used. Thanks to Jeff Anderson's post a while back. Jeff Anderson used to do the restorations and repairs on the Panasonic radios, though he never worked on these to my knowledge. But I figured out what types of bulbs to use, and I purchased them in quantity. And every radio that comes in for a restoration gets all new lamps, all new lights. So the final thing I had to address was connecting my phone to the radio. Now, with a working cassette deck and a working AM/FM receiver, we have two options right off the bat that we can try. One of them is a cassette adapter. Now the cassette adapters, there's two different kinds. There's the ones that connect with a 1/8 inch headphone jack, which most phones now no longer have. The other option is to use a Bluetooth receiver cassette adapter, which has a rechargeable battery. You have to charge it every so many hours. I think it's every 10 or 15 hours of use you have to recharge it. Maybe less. I don't know. I don't own one. But it does require you to charge that battery when it goes dead, and it ruins your cassette deck. Yes, they ruin your cassette decks. I can tell you this because every cassette deck that comes my way that has one of those tapes stuck in it because the belts let go, you can see the telltale wear patterns on the pinch rollers, which is not only that, but I'm finding that there's a lot of rubber buildup on the cap stands from those cassette adapters. They're not made from the best materials, so the materials that they're made of degrade inside your cassette deck. They also don't sound very good. They're not made with a lot of precision in mind. So what I find is a lot of them, the head alignment. So it's got a little, it looks just like a cassette deck playhead, but the alignment is always off just a little bit. So one side is stronger than the other. So you might have a strong left channel, a weak right channel, or vice versa. I don't like those. I think it's pretty obvious from my tone of voice. I hate them. They don't sound good. I have to charge it every so often, and it wears out my cassette deck. But there's a third option. The third option is to implant a Bluetooth module. So I had to spend a little bit of time looking at how this stereo is wired and to figure out where I can jump off for power, how I can inject audio into the amplifier. So I found a particular Bluetooth module made by D-Rock or Drock. That's the brand. It looks like this. I have an owner's manual here somewhere that has the logo on it. It was on my bench. No, it's not. Anyway, doesn't matter. I buy them. They're not terribly expensive, but what they give me is a couple of cool things. They're very small. I don't have one. The last one I had went into this radio. So it's a tiny little board, about that big, about the size of an M2 SSD. It's a tiny little board. And it has a few different options. This board is not made for any particular application. It's made to be fairly universal. And it's made for this type of project where you want to add Bluetooth to something that was never meant to have it before. So it's got, and this is what makes it unique, is it has an audio in jack as well as an audio out jack. So all I have to do is find a point somewhere on the radio where I can kind of intercept the audio signal. And I've chosen the tuner because of the way it's wired. On the Pioneers, the tuner has a ribbon. I actually have a tuner here. So a couple of things. On the Pioneers, this is one of my parts units, you've got the tuner, which is in the back of the radio. So a little bit of component identification here. This board is your Dolby, here, let me angle this way. There we go. This right here is your Dolby Pro Logic board. This contains the circuitry for, and that's what it's called in the schematic, so I apologize if it does more than that. But this does your Dolby Pro Logic noise reduction. Underneath that board is some circuitry for the cassette deck control. In fact, I believe it's mostly on that bottom board there. This bottom board is an interconnect board. Everything kind of connects to it like a motherboard. And our tuner is mounted clearly in the back under. You can always find a tuner in a radio, by the way, because it's usually covered in metal shielding. But there's a set of wires. They're all blue wires right back here. And all we're doing is we're cutting into the audio left and right wires. And I'm now feeding the audio from the Bluetooth module straight into that interconnect board. The audio from the tuner goes straight into the Bluetooth module. So what you have in effect is a board that will intercept the audio from the AM/FM tuner when it's activated. Once you pair your phone to it and you hear the chime, doot, 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 and I'll demonstrate that later in this video, how that works. It will cut the audio from the tuner and it will then replace it with the Bluetooth audio. So on this particular model radio, that is as seamless as humanly possible. One side effect of this is the way this stereo is wired, or the way it's configured. If I have audio from another source, from say the cassette deck, you will hear the cassette playing alongside what's coming in through the Bluetooth module. And that's because the way it's built from the factory, when the tuner is active, when you're listening to the FM tuner, it will automatically stop the cassette deck. It'll stop the CD player, even though those audio channels remain live. But what this does for us is it gives us an input that we can select. So normally, if there is nothing if the cassette deck or the CD player aren't active, the radio will not allow you to play audio from those audio channels. That's one way to put it. Long story short, there will be some overtalk, or you will hear both sources simultaneously. So if you have me install one of these Bluetooth modules, you're going to want to select the FM tuner or AM tuner. Won't matter, because that will stop the cassette and it will stop the CD player. And it will allow the audio from the Bluetooth module to go straight into the interconnect board. Now I'll demonstrate how this works in just a second, I promise. I actually got a request to do that from one of my prospective clients. Now, that is how I have addressed all of the issues with these Pioneers. This right here is an amplifier board. It also controls most of the power distribution inside the unit. I have a stack of these boards that all have various issues, and I have yet to figure out how to troubleshoot them. I do have the schematics. One of these days I'll sit down and I'll just mess around with one and see what I can come up with. The issues that seem to affect some of these units, either weak or no audio from one or more channels. And one peculiar issue is I have I think it's not this one, but it's another one I've got. It doesn't put out any lighting to the BBISHOPPCM control panel, the one on the bottom right here. So it will not illuminate the buttons, but the display will illuminate. It's the most peculiar thing. These radios have multiple lighting circuits. One of them is for the displays, and then there's 2 additional circuits for the button lighting. Kind of strange, but whatever. And not only that, but the BBISHOPPCM lighting, the display lighting on the BBISHOPPCM unit only comes on when the radio is playing. So when you have your ignition on, you won't get any light from this screen. And that's normal. That's how it's supposed to be until you turn the radio on. Yes, I have tried a recap on. I did a full recap on one of these boards. It didn't make a difference. So which brings me to my next point. I started doing these as I started recapping all of the radios that I got in here, and then I discovered that it really wasn't making a difference. So what I do now, every radio that comes into my shop, I inspect it for any bad capacitors, and if I find any, I'll usually change them, unless it's so extensively damaged that I can't, and then I'll contact the customer and see how they want to proceed, because they'll have to then pay me to repair the board if I can. But anyway, why don't we go ahead and demonstrate what one of these looks like and how the Bluetooth works. Now, before I do that, I want to talk about Panasonic radios. So I have so far done the standard Panasonic radio that is included on the on all other Miatas that don't have this. So if you've got a black Panasonic radio in your car, this is for you. I have not had any luck with CD player repairs on those. I've only had 1 or 2 successes and a lot of failures. I found that Jeff Anderson, who used to repair these radios, he had a business just like this, only a little bit more involved. He gave up repairing them because he could no longer find certain components that he needed. And I suspect that it was faulty lasers that was causing them to fail. I was fortunate on my BBISHOPPCM radio, in my car, I actually bought a brand new in package laser block, which is the laser beam section of the CD player. I managed to find a new old stock one, and I also installed new old stock pinch rollers. I got very fortunate. I found a guy who had one, and he didn't want a lot of money for it. But they are no longer available. But fortunately, I've been able to save the CD players on the Pioneers by just adjusting the power going to the laser beam. But the Panasonics, I have had great luck with cassette deck repairs, lighting repairs, and chassis repairs. Let me explain what I mean by that. The Panasonics, the way they're built, the way the boards were laid out at the factory, or actually in the drawing phase, It looks like they made they drilled the holes for the through-hole components too large. They're way too large. So it demands a little bit more from the solder that's holding the components to the board. And the end result of that is you get a lot of cracked solder joints. I Every single one that's been sent to me, and there's been quite a few, maybe 6 or 7 so far, every single one of them has shown cracked solder joints at some point in the, usually it's in the amplifier in the very back of the unit. The amplifier on that Panasonic is basically mounted to a large aluminum heatsink, which is screwed to the back of the radio. So all the connectors are going straight onto the amplifier and power board. It's basically the same board that we have here, only it's mounted on the back and it's got a giant heatsink on the back of it. For some reason, Pioneer didn't put really any heat sinks on these at all. I can't imagine why, but that's what they did. That was their choice. So, long story short, I can fix your Panasonic to an extent. I found some that actually had really no audio coming out of one or more channels, just like I have with the Pioneers. But for the most part, it's usually because of a broken solder joint. So I will accept your radio, I will work on it, I will look it over. If I cannot fix it, we'll talk. I mean, I don't want to get in the habit of charging people for unfixed radios, so we'll work something out. But I have had great luck with the cassette deck repairs. Typically on a Panasonic, you put a tape in, you try to insert a tape, and it doesn't go in. The reason for that is one of two things. Either a bad belt. Now those have one belt driving the entire mechanism, whereas the Pioneers have 3 belts. So 3 belts go into here, 1 belt in your Panasonic. And what ends up happening is the drive gears for the load-unload mechanism, or the cassette cradle, they're made out of a nylon that tends to shrink as it ages. So it shrinks and it starts to bind up on the shaft, the steel shaft that it rolls on. All 3 of those gears all have the same problem. So what I do is I take them off, I drill them out just a hair, just enough so that they can move again. And then I put them back together with some lubrication, and I do the rest of the cleanup and new belt, you know. Another thing I do with all the cassette decks that come into this shop is I check them for speed control. I have a cassette that puts out a 3000 hertz tone, and I have my multimeter back here wired to the headrest speakers, so it doesn't interfere with my audio testing. And what I'll do is I'll play the cassette and adjust the speed as necessary on the, oh, this one doesn't have a motor on it. But on the motor, there's a speed controller. You can just tweak it with a non-metallic adjustment tool. And you can get it. So the object is you want it putting out a 3000 hertz tone. And if the speed is off even a little bit, it's going to show up on this meter right here. Fun stuff. The Bluetooth demonstration. I want to show you guys how this works because I'm really happy with it and I've had a lot of customers. Now I will do Bluetooth on Panasonics. I just did one for a gentleman who has an NB. He has one of the later Panasonic stereos, which is the same stereo that Mazda used in the Protege, the 626, and a few other, I think the MX6 as well. I actually had one of those stereos in my 626 that I had back in high school, and that was in 2002. Nevertheless, I can do them all. Now, what I have to do for the Panasonic radios, and I'm trying to find a way around this, but I have to install a remote switch. So if you have a Panasonic radio and you want Bluetooth in your car, check in with me. Tell me what model you have and whether or not you have a CD player, because that matters. So on the NA, the 1990 to 97 NA Miatas, even though there was no 97, 96, whatever. On those, what I do is I latch onto the CD player if it has one installed. So if you've got a CD player, great, we can work with that. What I do is, if your CD player doesn't work, we'll take the mechanism out and we'll put the Bluetooth module in its place. So this way the dashboard appearance doesn't change at all, which is something that most of you guys want. You don't want any changes to your dashboard. I get that. You want it to look factory. That's my goal. So Bluetooth module goes into there, and we latch onto the cable going into the CD player mechanism. There's a board in there, and we use that as a soldering point. I just did one, as I was just saying, I did a Bose radio for a gentleman with an NB. I think it was a 2001, or 90. No, it was a 99. And for that one, we ended up using a remote switch. So that switch has to be mounted somewhere in the console, in the dash, in the glove box. You drill out a hole. I think it was a 13/16. You drill out a hole wherever you want it to be, and it just sits discreetly wherever it happens to be located. I also include about 3 to 4 feet of wire, so you have some choices as to where you can route it. That switch does two things. It powers up the Bluetooth module, and it also engages the auxiliary jack interface, which is what we tie into. But let's do it. So I want to demonstrate how this Bluetooth thing works on the Pioneers. So I'm going to turn on this power supply over here, which is going to simulate the ignition switch in your car. So we're turning the ignition switch into accessory mode, or starting the engine, whatever boats your float. So let's turn it on. Immediately the clock and the lighting should come on. On a normally functioning radio, you're going to have lighting on everything but the body sonic amplifier. That is normal. The amplifier only lights up when you turn the radio on. So I've got my phone here. I'm using an iPhone. Okay. So I'm going to turn my radio on to FM. Okay, we have sound. Now this is assuming I'm first time installing this in my car, first time using it. So I'm going to go to my phone, and I'm going to open up my Bluetooth preferences by holding it. You do the pull. So show that up on the screen here. No, it doesn't really work. So I'm gonna hold down Bluetooth on my phone until I go into this menu here. Why doesn't this show up on camera? Okay. I'm going to hold down on the Bluetooth. It brings me into this menu. Go to Bluetooth settings. Basically go to Bluetooth settings. Now the other way to get to that is by going into your control panel, or settings, and then going to Bluetooth. That might be faster. Some of you guys. Like that. Okay? Now I'm going to see under other devices, D-Rock BT. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to hear that tone. And that tone tells me that I've successfully paired my phone to this radio. A couple of things to point out. You can pair multiple phones to this radio, no problem. It's like a Bluetooth speaker in that way. So I can pair whatever I want. I can pair a phonograph to this. In fact, I've done that. Just for fun, I have a Bluetooth phonograph, and I was listening to records through one of these radios. So really, you can pair it with damn near anything. Now that I have it paired, I can open up iTunes and I can play whatever I want. And it's just like a Bluetooth speaker in that way. What you want to do, if you start to get distortion, you want to lower the volume on your device. But right now it's maxed on the phone. See how it distorts a little bit? There we go. So you want to keep the volume on your device down so that it doesn't distort at high volumes. There we go. Another thing I want to point out is the mute button on your Pioneer does not mute the sound. It actually lowers it. That's all it does. I think the button is really so that when you're pulling up to a traffic stop or a traffic light, you can lower the volume quickly and then bring it right back up again. Open, closed, wide. So that's it. That's simple. Now, what I want to point out, or what I want to do next, is I'm going to pretend like, so I've already paired the device. I'm playing music through it, but a phone call comes in. I can't demonstrate that. If a phone call comes in, you cannot answer it. That is not what this does. This does not function as a Bluetooth hands-free phone system. Unfortunately, it's just for pumping audio from the device to your ears. That's all it does. This will not function as a Bluetooth hands-free system. But if a phone call does come in and your car is running, let's assume you're parked in a safe place. What do? Very simple. Shut the radio off. Press the FM button twice to shut the radio off. And what that's going to do is it's going to immediately disconnect the Bluetooth module from your phone because it depowers the module that way. The Bluetooth module is powered, by the way, off of a power point on the radio that I found is powered with the unit. And that is true only for the Pioneers. The Panasonics don't have that feature, so those are powered differently. And I'll explain that in the instructions that you receive with your radio. Every radio that I send back comes with instructions that are written fairly concisely. I have had no complaints yet, explaining everything I'm telling you now. Once the phone call is over, all you've got to do is turn the radio back on again. Wait a second. And there it is. I've had some issues where it doesn't, if the phone doesn't, here, let me explain this for a sec. Let's say I've got my Bluetooth off. Bluetooth is turned off on my phone. Okay. I start the car up. Radio comes on. Okay. My Bluetooth is off. And you're like, oh, wait, I want to listen to music, so I'm going to turn the Bluetooth on again. See if it does it. Okay. It's not, see, what I found is these modules, they go out of pairing mode when they're powered up for more than a few seconds. So you want to make sure that whatever device you want paired to your Bluetooth module, the device you want to listen to through it, it has to be ready and willing and able to pair as soon as this thing's powered on. So what happened here is I turned the Bluetooth module on the Bluetooth transmitter on my phone. I turned it on after turning on the radio. Simple. I don't have to shut the car off. All I got to do is press FM twice to shut the radio off. Press it once more. And it pairs just like that. Simple. Okay, that pretty much covers it right there. For the Pioneers, or the Panasonics, things are a little bit more, not as clear-cut. Yeah, for those, I either can install a remote power switch, or I can power them off of the accessory terminal. What that means is you would have to, in the case of a failed pairing attempt, like I just demonstrated, you would have to shut the ignition off and then turn it back on again. But I'm leaning towards installing remote switches because I'd rather, if it were me, I wouldn't want to have to shut my car off. And the reason that there's a difference is because the Pioneers have a remote amp turn-on circuit built in. And that is what I'm latching off of on these. The Panasonics do not have that. So that is why they're a little bit different. So I hope this video was somewhat informative. To those of you who own a first generation or even a second generation Miata, you are my core audience. I do modify other radios on request. I had a gentleman send me a couple of Chevrolet stereos that needed some repair, and I'll do those too. I'll do anything, but I just have to set up a wiring harness for whatever you send me. Currently, my bench is wired for a Mazda stereo, so and it looks like Mazda used the same stereo wiring for pretty much all of the 90s and even the late 1980s. So that makes my life a little bit easier. Any questions, please leave them in the comments. I will leave my contact email for the business in the description of this video, so you can contact me directly via that email address. I have a special email address. It's stereorepairs@gmail.com, but I'll put it in the description box as well. And yes, special requests I'll do, or I'll consider. We'll talk. You guys have a great evening. Until then.